I'm Will Gompers, the BBC's arts editor. Can you everybody hear me okay? You've heard of herding cats, haven't you? Well, I'm herding architects and engineers, which I think is going to be even harder. We're going to have a conversation in the next hour about the intergenerational issues there are for architects and engineers. And we're going to hear from both the young and the less young. I can say that. I'm on the less young side. I know. I realise these things. And it's going to be fascinating, really. What are the challenges facing the younger architects and engineers, and how do they want to shape our world? And what are the impediments from them stopping them from doing that? And how maybe we, the older generation, how can we help them? So I'm not going to introduce a whole panel now because that will take another 5 minutes. I'll introduce them as they come up. Each panel member will speak for 3 or 4 minutes. Sit down again, the other one will come up, and then we as an audience and as a group can have a discussion about the issues that have been raised in the conversation. So for the first, I've got a running order here. We're going to start with young. We're privileging the young. We're going to start with Fergus Fielden, who's director of Fielden Fowler Associates, architects rather. Could you give him a nice warm round of applause as he makes his way to the stage? Thanks very much to the lectern. Thanks.
No one can.
No? Yep. Okay. Sorry, thank you. I'm Fergus Fielden from Fielden Fowles Architects. I saw that BD are hosting their big Architects of the Year thing. We won Young Architects of the Year last year. And we're probably, well, I'm certainly from the smallest, youngest, and probably the most low-tech practice out of everyone here. So I'm coming from a perspective of very small practices where we focus on kind of craft, skill, care, patience, and kind of unpicking complex problems. But lots of the topics that are being talked about today are quite interesting, with technology and the kind of the influence of that, and the kind of the tension of technology and that influencing quality, outputs, efficiency, and some of those challenges. One of my kind of bugbears is that we really need to make architecture, design, and construction engaging and attractive for young people, because the profession is losing so many people. That's partly through the costs of being trained, but it's also through the very low wages when you come out. And therefore, you know, people go into this. We go into it because it's the most creative, the most kind of impactful option within the construction industry. That's certainly how, as design leads in architecture, we feel. And we interview, you know, hundreds of people, and it's fascinating seeing the breadth of where people are coming from and their frustrations. And one of my other kind of slight frustrations, I don't want to be negative because actually, you know, I'm generally kind of upbeat about the outlook, but is that within bigger practices, people aren't always being trained as they might be, and people are focusing on a very narrow bit of construction. And actually, the skills that we need to unlock and deliver amazing projects are often the soft skills, and there's it's the breadth of experience. So we have a big contrast between the new graduates coming out, who are incredibly skilled, and the people we employ from larger practices where there can be a sense of frustration. So I think we should have a post-Part 3 kind of development framework, so that all practices have a kind of obligation to keep training people and give them the opportunities to unlock their careers and make sure that architecture continues to deliver what it has done through the centuries. So just to finish on another upbeat note is just the influence of technology on efficiency and things. So I'm interested in what blogs can do for us. I'm interested in what the kind of online forums can do and how they can mobilize you know, the next generation to be able to move a lot quicker and be a lot more light-footed, and actually kind of gather people from sometimes across the world to focus on issues which they want to overcome. And certainly for young practices, that's giving us a whole load of exposure and opportunities that never used to exist. And so people can go from working somewhere in a remote Scottish island and be known about all over the world, and that can unlock all sorts of opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fergus. Thank you very much. Fergus Fielden from Field and Fowles Architects. Don't sit on my phone, Fergus. Okay, next up, representing the more senior end of the profession, but still beautifully young, is Michelle McDowell, MBE, and Chair of Civil and Structural Engineering Group, BDP, and Architects, of course. Michelle, over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, the proposition for this session was an industry which is plagued with low productivity, a declining workforce, economic stagnation, and an uncertain political future, which is a very negative proposition and one that I disagree with a lot. In terms of productivity, and I worked this out this morning, that I've been in the industry for 33 years, so I've seen a lot of change. So we've gone from post to fax to email. We've gone from drawing board to CAD to BIM, from hand analysis to generative components. So the industry is moving. I'm not saying we can't do better, but all those issues represent better progress and better productivity. In terms of a declining workforce, yes, we do have to work on this, and at events like this, we can share our stories and let young people know how rewarding a career, particularly in engineering, can be. I think the profession is too fragmented. We need our institutions to come together, the RIBA, Institution of Civil Engineers, Structural Engineers, all of them to come together with a common purpose and represent our views. And as employers, I think we need to be more innovative if we want to have our fair share of the skilled young people who are out there. I'm a great believer in grow your own, and one way we can do that is through apprenticeships. We have found that very successful in BDP. And what's really good today is to see the budget announcement that there's several $100 million going in to encourage STEM subjects, which will certainly help us as engineers. In terms of political future, I'm not a political commentator, and the uncertainty of Brexit really does still hang over us. The government seems to be getting slowly to grips with it, and we can lobby them to get the best deal for our industry. I've been through more recessions than I care to remember, and no doubt it's been tough, and we've had casualties, we've lost talent, but we have survived and we come back stronger. The uncertainty of Brexit can encourage us to look beyond European boundaries, perhaps, where there's still a huge amount to do, particularly in infrastructure, in transport, seismic retrofit, housing, water supply. So there's a huge market there for us. In terms of what young people can bring, there's a lot of things they can do that we older people cannot do. Digital technology is a very strong element of that, and we're becoming, I believe, digital engineers. In my company, we're using even coding skills to get the software to do what we want it to do. And in my experience, younger engineers understand better than any how to address those huge challenges of global sustainability, from sustainable urban environments through to the specification of individual components. So young people, in my view, have a lot to offer, a lot that needs to fill the gap that we, as older people, cannot fill. Thank you. Okay.
Michelle, that's great. Terrific. Okay, the future looking slightly rosy, Michelle, albeit with a bit of Brexit. Third up, another youngster. This time it's Matt Fedigan from the Surveyors DOMEC. Okay, Matt, let's take a surveyor's point of view of the future as far as young people in this industry are concerned.
Thanks very much. I think I want to pick up as well, actually, similarly to the way you did, Michelle, on the actual hypothesis that's before us, which really faces the young industry professionals in our area. And the first point really is that we face a considerably challenging future. I think that I was in New York last week, actually, and I was reminded, actually, that there's plenty of reasons for pragmatic optimism, I would say, in our industry and area. I was working, I looked at the Empire State Building, and I was really reminded, actually, that in 1933, 1930s, after the Great Depression, they were building something like 4.5 floors per week when that was going on. It's real iconic architecture. So what I'm trying to make the point of there is that actually we faced challenges before as an industry, time, cost, quality challenges, scalability challenges around the production and influence of materials and design, and we'll continue to do so, and that's exactly what we help our clients to do at DOMEC and DOMEC Professional Services. Michelle, you also pointed out about the declining workforce and the productivity, which was the second element to the question that's been put before us. This is undoubted. It was highlighted in October 2016 by Mark Farmer in the Farmer Review. And we've seen, again, if we look at the US, we've seen pretty much about a 20% drop in productivity since 1964 in the construction industry alone. So we've really got a part, I think, as professionals across all disciplines to bring new people in, to retain the best and the most bright minds, I think, in the industry. And how do we do that? I think one of the key recommendations that I would pull out of the Farmer Report last year is this point about collaboration between the professional organizations and institutions. I think in order to thrive, I think in order to be international and to bring the message actually to millennials such as myself that this is a good industry, it's here to stay, I think that's an incredibly important point that we really need to take home. The final point that really I will focus on actually, because I think Michelle, you covered a few of the others, was political uncertainty. I think really it's important to understand and consider the context again that the industry finds itself in. Many of the people in front of me perhaps are from the baby boomer generation, so you will have dealt with World War II, the recession in the 80s, as well as rise in property prices. The majority perhaps will be Generation X, and you will have witnessed the end of the Cold War, Thatcher-Blair, Good Friday agreements, devolution of Scotland and Wales. There's a whole heap of challenges that are facing us, and I think that Generation Y, which is my generation, I think we're best placed to sort of take forward and address the challenges in a more collaborative way than we ever have done before. So I think going forward, the final message I would add, which I'm sure we'll unpack later, is that through the use of new materials and technology, that will certainly help the decline in productivity in our industry. But more than ever before, it's absolutely imperative that we work together, both interprofessionally, as institutions, as architects, engineers, surveyors in my case, as well as generationally as individuals, to really benefit from all the talents of all of the different generations at play. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That's Matt Fedigan from Domec, the surveyors, saying that Generation Y are more capable of solving the problems of the future than us oldies. Sunan Prasad might not agree. He's going to speak to us next, and Anand is a very experienced architect and once past president of REBA as well, and obviously in charge of Poinaya and Prasad Architects.
Thank you, Will. And I want to start by thanking Sue James and The Edge, which actually does have some very young people in it now, for putting this on and having this very interesting debate that we're about to have. So first, policemen are older than you, and then, and then they're younger than you, and then the Prime Minister of the country is younger than you. But the real shock is when people start offering you seats on the tube. So that's when I knew that I was fit to speak in this spot, in this capacity. So what can someone from a generation actually say usefully about this very interesting title, which is, how does the next generation want to shape our world? Well, of course, by definition, I don't know, but I can have a guess. So I'm going to first say something about what I see the next generation of leaders actually doing, and secondly, what I would like to see them doing. So the UK GBC, the UK Green Building Council, of which I'm a board member, has had a Future Leaders program for a while. And it's an incredibly exciting program, and it's almost entirely optimistic. And as previous speakers have said, it goes quite against the grain of the proposition, which is rather pessimistic in this, in the headline of this session. They are very fired up with their capacity to disrupt things as they were done, and also for them many things which are unusual and abnormal for my generation, sort of challenges such as climate change, sustainability, the digital economy. These are the norm. They're the normal. They're normalized and completely internalized, and that's a very important thing. And also, they are much more capable of crossing disciplinary boundaries, and I think this is going to be really perhaps the main theme of our session. Secondly, then, what would I like to see happen? And one of the biggest things is actually I would love the next generation of professionals in the industry to see themselves as part of the whole built environment industry and not as part of their professions. I would put it as extremely as that. It should be the collaborative, the whole team first and your profession second, and not the other way around. And I think that would be a radical break. We often talk about breaking out of the silos. This is a bit more than that. It's actually a question of an entirely new mindset. And in this scenario, mindset is going to be more important than credentials. And I think that's a very key thing, I think, to bear in mind. And there is a curious parallel between that breaking out of the silos and the current crisis that our political culture finds itself in, which is reinforced by the bubbles we live in, the echo chamber, and the fact of discovering on the morning of the 24th of June that there was an entire country that many of us apparently didn't even know about. And I think that was a shocking thing, and I hope very much that as part of breaking out of their comfort zone, seeing themselves as part of a wider one, the next generation of professionals will also be better than my generation has been at bridging a divided population and restoring faith in evidence, in expertise and truth, but in a collaborative way. Thank you.
Sunan Prasad, that was excellent, Sunan. Thank you very much indeed. Very good, very provocative, excellent. Okay, next up we have Doug Baldock, who's got a broken arm, who broke it last night because some bastard in a car cut across him and he was on his push bike. I know, it's sad, but it hasn't stopped him from speaking. He's a real trooper. And he's coming from an engineering perspective. Doug, over to you.
Thank you, Will. Okay, yeah, I did break my arm yesterday and it hurts a lot, so I'm happy to be here. Building engineering firms are starting to understand the depth which BIM's tentacles can potentially reach, and the push for continuous improvement and efficiency will drive us at an alarming rate. This will impact a lot of MEP consultants' core business as skilled tasks become automated, and firms need to plan ahead with open eyes to maintain competitiveness. Engineers will then need to adapt their skill set to stay in the game. This will involve improved soft skills, computer literacy, and systems integration. I believe that computer scientists will probably become as useful in the design of building engineering systems as us engineers. I believe systems engineering will feature heavily in the engineer's toolbox as we move towards a more connected built environment. The interfaces will become so complex and so important that a robust and well-managed process must be followed to ensure building operates as intended. Moreover, in industry in general, generational expectations are different, and we should move towards a people-centric design to tackle this. The challenge for the industry then is to focus on humans, and this will bring innovation and breakthrough solutions in otherwise very conservative and traditional designs. Consequently, this will require change to the methods and design processes. A design-based approach will supersede the typical management approach, with a focus on users' needs and collaboration across organizations. Finally, technology. This should be the enabler for change and not the driver. We should be looking at the human need to identify the problem and then benefit from the greater choice of options to solve them, rather than trying to tailor new technology to undefined problems. We need to use technology to solve our problems and be careful not to create any more for ourselves. Thank you.
Well done, Doug. Passionately done with your broken arm. That's fantastic. That's what you get with engineers. Broken arms don't even hurt. Right. Okay, now we're moving on to the construction side of the business, which is terrific, with our youngest delegate today, which is Stephanie Key, who's from Skanska.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Stephanie Key, and I'm a project manager for Skanska. I actually want to start by just giving a bit of background as a young professional of how I got to where I am as a project manager in Skanska. So I studied geography at university, specialising in sort of environmental modules. And then I started with Skanska as a graduate environmental advisor. Worked on various contracts, sort of Crossrail, National Grid, clients such as that, and then decided at about 2 years in that I wanted to do something different. I wanted to stretch myself and challenge myself. So I moved over into the world of operations, and did some work for TfL, and I'm now a project manager over on High Speed 2. So I have had quite a varied background into where I've come. But one thing I did want to say before I start giving my opinion on this is that young professionals are a very diverse group of individuals, and my views might not necessarily represent that of the all young professionals here today. But I was having to think about how best to answer this question, and I've sort of got a slightly different perspective of what the other panel has spoken about. I sort of thought about young professionals, Generation Y, millennials, and a very adaptable, versatile group of individuals. We've grown up in this fast-paced, forever-changing world, and these skills have sort of come naturally to us, and something we can do to respond to challenges and ambiguity. Is it me? Shall I? Just like secondly is around values. Young professionals today, I feel, do put a lot of emphasis on values. I'm not saying that the older generation doesn't put the same emphasis on, but it's something that's been instilled with us. So, like, growing up through school and into education, I think working for companies that we're proud of and doing things with a purpose is becoming much more important. I don't know how many of you have seen the online clip, the millennials question that's been doing the rounds recently, but they talk about, you know, Generation Y, millennials wanting to make an impact. What does that mean? But I think it's true, and I think that young professionals will respond to a challenging future by wanting to do something better and, you know, having a positive impact. And my last point is around emerging technologies. I think this is one that nearly everyone has touched upon, and it's obvious, but I do think that young professionals have this natural, smarter working ethos and a way of looking at how things have been done. Could it now be done differently? And I think that's a really great tool that they've got to any challenges. We've mentioned a lot around low productivity and uncertain political future. That smarter working ethos will really help them out. So I do think my three things mainly are around adaptability of young professionals, the values that they have, and the way to work differently. Thank you.
Excellent, Stephanie. Excellent. That was Stephanie Key from Sansa. Well, there were really good provocations. Just to remind everybody what it actually says here. A challenging future. How does the next generation want to shape the world? Which sounds quite exciting, and then it gets really quite down. They will need to find ways of delivering better buildings more cost effectively in an industry plagued by low productivity and a declining workforce. And I wanted to start just by asking Fergus about this, because while these conversations were happening, these presentations were happening, I leant across to Fergus and said, is that right? Is there low productivity in this industry? And he said he thought not.
Yeah, well, I don't think within the design industry there's such a problem with low productivity. I mean, when you think about complex buildings of the past, like the Pompidou, and you look at the team sizes, sometimes very, very small teams are delivering huge projects. So I don't know whether the productivity is actually more within the construction side. Personally, I don't feel it's within the design side. I think that we're becoming more and more efficient, and that technology is enabling that. That's my personal experience.
Doug, you said. Matt, sorry, you said you I thought you had a broken arm. You said about low productivity very specifically. Were you talking about construction or right across the piece? Wait a sec. Can somebody whack the mic up, please?
Can you hear me now? There we go. I was specifically referencing the Farmer report, which is actually a review into productivity in the construction sector, as you say quite rightly, Doug. And I think it's that it really does. It references that this is actually an international shift. And it's an interesting talking point, actually, in terms of our aspirations to, in terms of how many houses we need to build for the future demographics of the population. If you look at, take somewhere like Japan, for instance, at the moment, Tokyo at the moment is capable, just because of society's appreciation of how best to use new technologies and prefabrication, of outputting the entire amount that we produce in 1 year within one city. So absolutely, we've got a lot to learn and a lot in terms of education, I think, across the, nationally to consider. But absolutely, yeah, I think undoubtedly there's more to be done, I think, about in terms of professions working together collaboratively to achieve better value. And part of that's starting to happen now, I think, on the larger projects with government intervention on BIM and things like that. And also at the far end, which is the end I'm interested in as a surveyor and an FM professional at DMEC, which is actually about the end use of the building. I think time and time again, surveyors will come back actually as a repair exercise, when design hasn't quite been grasped and got right at the detail preliminary stages.
Sunand, I want to try and get to sort of the heart of what we're discussing here, really, which is the difference between the generations. You're a very senior figure in this industry now, and you're obviously very experienced within it, and to a certain extent are handing the baton on to the next generation. What do you think? And I'm going to ask Doug to respond to this. What do you think you need to do, and our generation, to give the next generation, the younger generation, the 30-somethings and the 20-somethings, the resources they need to succeed? What do we need to do?
I want to start by actually directly trusting them. Trust, absolutely. To trust them to understand their world. Actually, I mean, Nelson Mandela once told a wonderful story against himself. He thought he was very wise. He was very wise. But towards the end of the time in Robben Island, he was visited by his son who had just turned 18. And he thought it was about time he gave his son some life lessons. And he started talking, and his son said, "It's okay, old man. I know my world. You've been in this prison all this time. I understand this much better than you do." Now, you don't have to be in a prison to not understand somebody else's world. And I think that was lovely, because he realized he had to completely trust that person. Now, how does that actually enacted in life? So, for example, in architecture, it is a very kind of age-oriented culture in terms of, for example, promotions in architectural practice. In fact, I think that contractors and engineers and project managers are much better at this. So one thing architects can directly learn is to change the structure of advancement in their profession. I think one of the reasons I think that women aren't in higher senior positions in the industry is this very, very slow kind of proving yourself at a huge length before you can get anywhere. And I think if we really want to tap the capacities of this next generation, which for the first time knows all the craft skills better than the older generation does. The older generation now cannot, there was a time when the master in the studio could function without assistance, because it was always a he, could do the drawings, could produce the stuff, and knew it all. They cannot produce a bean without the help from people as young as recently graduated students. And I think it's time to really recognize that, and to not step back, but to show real leadership in realizing that everything that people like me believe in will be enabled through others.
Okay, Doug, that sounded like Sunand was saying the two biggest things he feels that needs to be incorporated within the relationship between the young and the old is a sense of trust and respect. Would you agree with that? Because I noted a comment you made when you were speaking. I think it was you. You're saying that you have different generational expectations than Michelle and Sunand and me. So was Sunand right? And then what are your generational expectations?
I mean, I think personally, buildings are becoming much, in my opinion, much more complex, especially with the increase in technology. And I think that the design processes that are used traditionally, especially from the REBA plan of work, is becoming slightly old hat. And we need to maybe redesign the process to allow for engineers in particular, structural and MEP, to be much more involved at very early stages to ensure that the buildings and the built environment that's designed is suitable for the people and the users are going to be using it. I think it's still too disparate, it's still too separated between architecture, MEP, structures, and all these other specialists that are coming around. And I believe that we need to sort of take a step really quite far back and start again in designing the process of designing buildings.
And what are the generational differences you talk
Well,
about?
in that context, I mean, the millennials look at coming to work in a different way to the older guys. They want more flexibility. They want hyper flexibility. They want to be able to treat work as they would being at home, and that changes the way we design everything, because they don't see work as being work. They see life as being life, if you say. And that's what I meant by generational expectations, and that will change the way we design buildings. And then we need to focus on the users.
Terrific, Doug. But does Michelle agree? She's a very senior character within the engineering field. Is Doug talking absolute sense, and are you sort of learning from hearing him, or is it, come on, mate, wake up and smell the roses, that's not how life works?
No, I think, I'd like to think that some of the older generation in leadership positions are enlightened, and talk about recognizing the skills that younger people have, letting them flourish, letting them rise up organizations. That's certainly the approach I have. And quite interestingly, the point that Sunan made is that my team has a good proportion of women rising up in the group. So it's quite interesting in that approach.
And what about this very specific-ish comment that Doug made about engineers getting into the process much earlier on?
Well, I'm a firm believer in that. I'm from a background of my company, BDP, are architects, engineers, and designers, and I'm a really strong believer that sitting down together with an architect, with a blank sheet of paper, as an engineer, together you can shape a design, a building, and really come up with a much better design.
And Sunan, that kind of talks to what you were saying about the younger generation being much more comfortable with the cross-disciplinary nature of what building and architecture is going to be like in the future.
I think they are potentially, but because they tend not to be involved in the institutions, there is still a big drag. You know, on the project level.
So why are they not involved in institutions?
Well, that's an interesting question in itself. But on the project level, we collaborate all the time. You know, and in our practice, it's just natural to work with a multidisciplinary team from the start. The impediments to that, by the way, can very often be the client who doesn't want to appoint the people that need appointing at the start. And you know, we will soon get into a very long conversation about procurement and all sorts of things if we're not careful. But coming back to this point, we collaborate well at project level. This industry does not collaborate well on the bigger stage, on the political stage, on the strategic stage. And especially the institutions are still putting themselves first. Well, in a way, that's almost written into their charters. You know, for members of institutions, they are an architect or an engineer first, and only second are they part of the industry. And I would hope that we can change that. Why younger people aren't joining the institutions is because the same thing. It's kind of age capture. You know, the positions are still held by older people. It's very rare for anybody to become a president of an institution in their 30s. In fact, virtually unknown. 40s, you'd be doing really well. You're considered young. And at 50s, you're still considered not that old. And you know, in the 60s, yeah, you're about ready for doing it. You know, that's stupid for the modern world.
I don't know. I think this idea that in your 50s you're not that old is really great, personally. You're a lovely audience. You're sitting there so patiently. Would anybody like to ask a question of our panel? You've got a gentleman here. Anybody else? So I can just get a sense of hands as one. Okay, fine. Okay, we'll take the gentleman here, and then we'll take this gentleman over here next.
Yes, Doug, when you finished his presentation, you said something along the lines of we need to use technology to improve our lives, not to create more problems. Michelle ended her presentation with saying something along the lines of young people will have to become much better digital engineers. I wonder whether, in light of the news you heard overnight that the CIA have operationalized television sets as monitoring, whether they think that, for instance, the large-scale implementation of smart metering could cause a problem in terms of cyber disruption if the malevolent people were to access them.
Okay, I'm just going to repeat that for the rest of the audience. I think, was the question about cyber security? Was that right?
Yeah.
Michelle, do you want to take it?
Well, I was really alluding to the use of technology for the technical design of buildings. So for me, that's where the power lies and where young people can really apply skills that the older generation don't have to drive productivity and drive design quality. In terms of cybersecurity, I'm not so sure.
Well, Matt's keen to come in.
The only thing I was going to say on the cybersecurity side, there's one book that I've certainly read, a key text called The Fourth Industrial Revolution by a guy called Klaus Schwab, who set up the World Economic Forum. He took about 800 of the leading chief executives from 800 leading companies around the world about a year or two ago. And this question actually is directly linked to one of the previous things that we spoke about in terms of productivity. If we look at other industries, such as pharmaceuticals, for instance, they've seen 145% improvement in productivity, as opposed to a 20% decline, as we mentioned, for the US. What he says there in that book, in the key text, to get back to the point, is that if you take those industries that have seen such a rise in productivity and seen such gains, you're absolutely right to raise the question of cybersecurity. From a legalistic perspective, actually, when it comes to BIM and design and FM and the management of buildings, I would say I'd go one further, actually, than just cybersecurity, and say that in future, it's going to be interesting. And again, I am absolutely a pragmatic optimist, so I certainly don't want to make a negative point, but it will be interesting to see the legalistic and the litigious landscape as well as things progress. In terms of who owns the data, is it better to own the data itself? Is it better to own the process? Is it better to own the app? And I think really all of this is underpinned by the fact that, if we look at the way things are changing, the likes of Uber don't own any cars. The likes of Facebook don't do any, they don't put any content out there. These are the biggest industry. Airbnb, for instance, don't own any real estate. That's the way things are changing, and fundamental to the success of those organizations is this point on cybersecurity. And without doubt, if you read any of the key areas of research that I have in this area, I'd say that without a doubt, it's certainly a growth area and a mega trend, as it's called in the book, that is certainly here to stay. And an industry, if you've got the skills, that I'd certainly encourage perhaps you getting a grounding in.
Very good. Okay, Matt, the gap in the market for cybersecurity. This gentleman just here, please. Just first 4 rows back.
Hi. I just wanted to address the point on graduates and attracting them to the built environment industry. And just how, perhaps to the panel, just how would you, because you would have studied for a long time and you come out, perhaps the starting salary isn't the best out there, and perhaps comparing that to other industries, that might attract the talented graduates. So how would the industry adapt to that, or how can they overcome that challenge?
That's a great question, and I'm going to ask Fergus to answer it, because you said in your speech, Fergus, you think this is a real issue. How can you attract young people into this industry? It's being repeated by this gentleman here. What's the answer?
Well, my feeling is that it does come down to offering them the opportunities, and that's where I sometimes, when I'm asked to give advice to young people who are soon to graduate, I ask them about what their intended career path is, because there are very, very different paths, whether you go to a very big firm where you do get a certain kind of process and training and you end up as part of the industry in some respects, or whether you're more kind of focused on a certain design typology or a certain design process. And so my feeling is that young graduates should be more demanding. When they go for interviews, they should be more in control of their own destiny. Young people are more in control of their destiny in many other aspects of life now, and when you're applying for jobs, you need to put your criteria forward as well, and make sure that it's mapped out and that you can then hold your employers accountable, and vice versa.
But the issue I think you alluded to was slightly the other way round, which was the industry was struggling to attract the talent.
Well, it's not that there's plenty of talented people coming through. My fear is that lots of them are lost during the training, or some are put off beforehand because of the costs. And so when you look at it from a logical perspective or a financial kind of perspective, it's not always the most attractive profession. And therefore, we have to offer them the creative opportunities, which is often why people are going into the industry, and a chance to actually express themselves. And that's what I believe in fostering with young people coming through. and then your practice or wherever you're working will benefit in kind.
And would you, just on money, because you can go into a big corporate, I understand that, but you've done your own thing, very bold, very brave, very enterprising. Does it pay as well, or would you actually earn more if you were part of a big practice?
Don't ask my wife, because she was completely fed up for years. I mean, it's a long process, and this is coming from people who have been very, very lucky along the way, and we've had lots of things have worked out for us. But it's brutal, and actually, I think if we're the lucky ones, I just fear for everyone else. So financially, it's a long game. It's a very long game, and we're now beyond break even, and it's worthwhile. But it's certainly, I mean, that's not why we went into it.
No.
So yeah.
Stephanie, I want to bring you in here as well. I mean, you talked about this issue as well. So what I want to know really is what attracted you to this industry? What puts young people off from this industry? And then thirdly, how will your age group cross this barrier that Sinan spoke about between the 50% of people who wanted Europe and the 50% of people who didn't, and therefore a divided country?
Yeah, I think what attracted me to the construction industry was the variety of projects you can work on, the different roles that's available in the construction industry, the amount of development you get and the amount of support you get in the construction industry. I think I'm an example of someone that's come in an environmental specialist function and decided that I wanted to change and I wanted to do something different. And I moved into operations and project management. And that was one of the things that I think is a real big thing we need to sort of highlight about the construction industry, is the variety of roles available and the different direction that it can go in. I think one really important thing in terms of attracting graduates into the construction industry is the image of the construction industry. It needs to be highlighted as the high-tech construction industry.
That's not how it's perceived generally, is that right?
I think it's getting there, but I think I think more can be done in that area. There's a lot around the image of construction that could be improved. But I also think something that it's quite personal to me, and I think it's very important on this, is that young professionals and millennials now should be the ones to try and get and attract that next generation in. We're the ones that have come in, sort of seen what the need, the skills that are really important, sort of what you have to do to get into this industry, and then take that back to those that are in education at the minute. I'm part of my old university's professional advisory committee, and I love going there and sort of helping the graduates there and say to them, actually, don't worry too much about your skills. It's about your people skills. It's about your communication. It's about thinking efficiently. Getting that for them to sort of focus on those areas, I think will really help us to attract that next generation. But I think the young professionals currently are the key to that.
And what can your generation do, as Sinan was asking you to do, to bridge the rift in the country between those people who have one perspective and those who have another?
I would kind of go back with a challenge on that actually, and say that young professionals, in order to bridge those sorts of gaps, need to be in the decision-making roles. It's very hard for young professionals right now to have that influence. I'm not saying that young professionals need to have this handed on a plate and they will get put into these sort of decision-making roles where they can help to influence those areas, but a lot of pressure is put on young professionals to solve issues. I hear quite a lot like millennials are the key and those sorts of phrases, and I think that puts a lot of pressure on one group of people who aren't yet in any sort of, well, the majority aren't in decision-making roles, so I think that's quite a difficult one.
Sinan, I mean, that's directly at you and what you said. I mean, you did allude to this, that there were not enough young people on boards in institutions. It seems to be an issue. So you have somebody saying, I'm willing to step up to the plate, but I'm not being invited to the table.
No, I sympathize and I agree. That is the problem. Also, we can't sort of do away with some real conflicts between generations, which are culturally normal. Anyone, I have a stepdaughter who's now 13, and I'm seeing a type of human being that I didn't know existed. And there are all sorts of things which are fundamental to my ethical mindset, which are out of the window. You know, the sense of entitlement, the sense of you know, what should be ready for you, and how the world should treat you. They are not what I was used to. So the older people, if they are to invest this trust in younger people, do have to cross some barriers and some thresholds, and it needs courage and trust, and actually, above all, it needs a kind of an irrational faith in the future, and that's really what's called for now. I think that logic and you know, risk assessment and spreadsheets, they've got us as far as they will. We now need to kind of have a whole different view about what is possible in the world and just enact it. And if it doesn't work, then do something else. But let's not be held up by risk assessment any longer.
It sounds like breakfast round at St Anne's is a real laugh every morning. There was a question over here. I'll come to you in a minute. It's a question for this gentleman here.
Hi, I've got a question about the lack of entrepreneurs in this industry. I'm a BIM manager, formerly actually working at Skanska, and the level of BIM literacy in the industry is frankly shocking.
The level of what literacy, sorry?
The level of BIM literacy, building information modeling literacy, or in fact any form of technological literacy is shocking in the industry. I'm so glad that one of the people on your panel have mentioned the book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution. Frankly, the industry doesn't know what's coming. Most of the people here don't even know of the term, the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And I mean, I've got to a point in my career where I actually think, instead of helping the incumbents to, you know, adapt to the new age, there should just be more attempts to disrupt the sector and basically kill off the dinosaurs.
Oh, that's harsh. I'm feeling that.
What do you say?
Were you saying there's not enough building literacy? I didn't quite hear.
Oh, sorry. I mean, you can ask any of the BIM specialists on your panel, but BIM is to the construction industry what the internet was to retail. So it will revolutionize everything we think about in construction.
What, the internet, the digital revolution?
Basically, my specialism, BIM, building information modeling.
Building information modeling. Yeah, you're a dinosaur, Michelle.
No, I totally agree with you. I think BIM is the revolution that's going on. I think you have to appreciate that people of my generation, people who are older than me, weren't brought up in that, you know, in that world. When I was at university, there was a very small computer suite that you were able to go along to. It had a special key, and there were a couple of computers in there, and it was really hard work to get it going. You know, now things are a lot different. So
But I want to come back to this gentleman, if I may, because you sound frustrated. You sound as if you're being prohibited from doing what you want to do.
Yes, because within our industry, the way you kind of move forward is to you basically work within the inside. And I'm saying we should be a bit more like the technology sector, like in fintech, for example. We need challenger banks. We need challenger contracting companies. We need challenger architectural practices. We need to challenge the ways things are done at the moment.
What in what corporate body? I mean, what does this challenge exist in? Are you sort of like a tech company hanging out in Cambridge or something? I mean, what are you getting to?
The thing is, architectural services, being a service sector, doesn't actually have a lot of capital costs. So it's not that difficult with clients willing to give small practices a try, give younger architects a try, for the younger architects to be able to do things so much more efficiently in a much quicker time, in the same way that technology has revolutionized every other sector. It just requires a far more entrepreneurial mindset. It's happening in every other sector. It's happening in, I mean, Tesla, for example, is now worth the same as Ford.
Yeah. Okay. So we just have not woken up to the potential of technology, and we're all very old-fashioned. I think, and it's very frustrating for some people who think that they can contribute, but are not finding a way in which to do so.
Okay, so I think certain building types will benefit hugely. Buildings like this building, for example. But whether this is a piece of architecture or construction is to be debated. You know, I mean, I think that the type of architecture that lots of people are involved in has nothing to do with BIM. We're specifying materials where it's much more about the patterner and the weathering and lots of things that one day we may be able to be modeled, but we're a long way from that. We're working with rammed earth, with cob, with lots of craft, and lots of the kind of finer qualities of architecture and the things that are much more uplifting at the moment certainly can't be plugged into a simulation. And so I'm coming at it from a slightly different perspective. I totally appreciate what you're saying about that it will be a revolution, but it won't be a revolution overnight, because the majority of an awful lot of practicing architects are one-man bands at the moment, and there's got to be, we're coming at it from both ends, so it's complex.
Matt?
I think the point you make is absolutely fantastic, actually. I really do. I think the thing and the crux of this, for me, when I've looked at it, is actually a wrestling motion at the moment between actual skills available in the BIM area in itself and the future layout of it. So what I mean by that is you've got governments at the moment making up about 25% of the construction industry in the UK, say. That leaves about 75% of commercial private sector, all wrestling for the same limited number of expertise in that area. And I totally agree with you. I can hear the frustration in your voice, actually. And when I worked in the United Arab Emirates for a time, BIM is not new technology. It's in a different form now. It's evolved considerably. But that was years ago. This is not new. When I say this at surveying conferences, as I will in April at the Building Surveying Conference in front of 1,000 people, they'll be shocked again. But it isn't new technology. I think the other thing about this point, there is no competition either. There's a wrestling for the resources, but because we don't have, as in pharmaceuticals and automotive industries, we don't have the international entrants challenging the existing status quo. We don't see the innovation and the evolution of the new business models that are needed to take the technology forward and really bring the scale to roll it out that's needed. And the final point I would make, which I think you sort of touched on actually, is if that was possible, eventually we should be in a position to actually, we're looking at, in my area, in my region, in Manchester University, they've developed graphene technology, which you'll be familiar with. And I think that there we've got a great opportunity for 3D additive printing, so that's where we don't have any wastage in the process and we build things up in layers. And to marry the couple together, exciting design, BIM, and we can see the end uses of the building in a really efficient way. And it's not new technology, it's all about the skill sets and the mindset that actually it's relatively easy to understand and develop the skills.
Matt, thank you very much. Now, I promise this lady would take her question. So the lady in the middle here, please.
What do you think institutions could be doing better to nurture more interdisciplinary professionals? Because at the moment, routes to chartership and professional qualifications can be quite narrow and prescriptive.
Stephanie, I'm going to ask you to pick that one up, please. What more could institutions, did you say,
yeah, institutions.
do to enhance an environment of cross-disciplinary practice?
It's hard for me to comment on the institutional side of things, because personally I haven't gone down that route myself, but I can talk from moving from an environmental role into an operational role and sort of how that worked out with my company. I don't know if that's going to answer your question the way you want it, but for me, I think when I wanted to move over into a different role, into a completely different discipline, it's just having that support network there and having that the companies and I suppose the institutions are bought into that idea that just because you have skill sets in one area doesn't mean they're not transferable into another area. And I think it goes back down to the importance of people skills, not necessarily the sort of competency-based skills. I'm not sure if that's quite answered.
Well, let me give Sunan the last word on this, because we've got to wrap up. But you mentioned this within your provocation, that we need to encourage more interdisciplinary practice. The lady is asking, fine, up for that, how?
Yeah. Well, maybe rather than give the whole answer now, I'll say please have a look at the EDGE report on collaboration. It is a very thorough piece of work over a year, a lot of evidence gathering, and some very succinct and punchy recommendations, which I wish I could immediately parrot to you like this. But fundamentally, it's about the way the industry, especially the professional side of the industry, trains and teaches people and the kind of attitudes and mindsets that are engendered during your education. How can we have, for example, common foundation courses that would, from the beginning of your training, make it clear that this is a collaborative process where you have to show leadership and work with others rather than an individualistic one. Architecture is particularly bad at this kind of collaboration because individual talent and excellence are so highly regarded, well above the ability to collaborate. There are recommendations for institutions, for individuals, and so on. And I think that it's something that, because it's culture change, it's not very easy to legislate for. But there are plenty of things that we can be doing.
Sunan, thank you very much. Thank you all very much. I'm sorry we ran out of time. I know there's more questions that people wanted to ask, but the panel will be making their way down to where that Brompton bike is in the corner and having their mics ripped from them, and then you can just pounce to them. Everybody else has. It works really well. You get a private session. Thank you. You've been a terrific audience. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to be back in about 10 minutes talking to the magnificent Niall McLaughlin about his practice and his work and all his different buildings, houses and public buildings. He's a complete star, as most of you will know. But in the meantime, could you please give my wonderful panel, young and old, a very good round of applause. Thanks very much.